is sadly expected to rise. According to the Red Cross, over 30,000 people slept in shelters last night due to the storm. For the latest, we go to Steve Harrigan in Koontz, Texas. Steve, what do you got?
Greg, we're in Koontz now. We're trying to drive to Beaumont, but the road to Beaumont is actually a river. It gets to be about 7 feet deep behind me, and there's actually frogs jumping all around me right now. Throughout the day, we've seen volunteers with flat-bottom boats. They've been going into subdivisions to my left and to my right, going door to door and pulling out anyone who wanted to leave. For those who wanted to stay in their flooded houses, they've been bringing out medicine and canned goods. What happens here has been tremendous. 49 inches of rain in just 5 days. And one effect, when you get that much water here that quickly, entire towns have become islands. We saw 2 men going out in the boat here earlier. They were going to Sour Lake. That's about 16 miles away. They say the entire town is cut off by water. No rescuers have been there yet. We don't know what we're going to find. That's the real worry here. When this water begins to recede, what will we find? Real concerns about casualties going up in places like Beaumont. Greg, back to you.
Steve, thanks. So, you know what else takes a hit when disaster strikes? Opinion slingers like me, who are sidelined as we become, like you, witnesses to real news. Not fake news, real news. When all you have are visuals of human misery and human spirit, who needs me? The only thing that matters is helping the helpless. And as real news erupts, crud like identity politics, MTV Awards, Kathy Griffin, they return to where they belong. Toys in the closet, suddenly outgrown and forgettable. Shallow minds can't survive a flood, although some have tried. Slate, a blog, calls the heroism that we've seen a myth. Climate change apostles use crisis to mock skeptics. Academics joke about karma. The media knocks Melania for her shoes and knock Mr. Trump for his lack of empathy. To that point, what did emotional expression get you in Katrina? Government Blanco shed some tears while delaying National Guard troops for days. Mayor Nagin shouted emotionally on TV. But what about all those buses left unused and then ruined by him, or the Red Cross being delayed entry to New Orleans? Ultimately, Blanco went away. Nagin's in jail. And President Bush won't be remembered for turning the other cheek when both blamed him for their errors. Now, it's too soon to judge Mr. Trump on this, but you know it's coming. Just weeks ago, the media used an evil act in Charlottesville to indict America. Now Harvey arrives to repudiate that notion, writing a perspective that had been wrong for so long. We aren't what the media says we are, divided, hateful, evil. What the news has been telling us for years has been dispelled in just a few days. There's no room for spin when you see those rescues with your very own eyes. Americans are what those pictures are: selfless, colorblind, inspiring. The news may be bad, but for once it shows us who you really are in times of crisis. Good. All right.
That was great.
Oh, well, thank you. All right. My job is done.
And we'll see you after 10.
I know it's a cliche, Lisa, but it's like it takes a specific trying experience to put everything in perspective, right?
Absolutely. And look, I mean, the media wants to divide this nation. We saw it, as you mentioned, with Charlottesville. But when we see the images from Harvey, and as you mentioned, when you see Texans grouped together, and not even Texans, you have the Cajun Navy, you have people from across the country going to Texas to help these individuals in need. And I think what it demonstrates and it underscores that we are more united as a nation than we are divided. And as you mentioned, colorblind, people helping each other regardless of race, regardless of religion. Those questions aren't asked. It's simply, do you need help? And if they do, they help them. That is America, these images that we've seen. So I fully endorse your monologue, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's what needed to be heard.
I want that on the back of my book, endorsed by Lisa Booth. Jesse, it's a welcome relief from what we see on the news, but it must frustrate some people because you can't spin this to anything.
Exactly. There's an old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And when you see these pictures out here, the viewers can't but help feel the humanity and see the truth. And the media, they need images and they need pictures to sell a story. But when there's no images, there's a vacuum. And the media can doctor it, they can add their spin, and they can add fake news. you know, they're in a scandal, you know, in the IRS scandal or Russia. There's no video. So the media comes in and they push their own agenda and it leaves it up to your imagination. But when something like this happens, and as devastating as it is, there's something so brutally honest about what we're seeing. It's just 180 degrees different from what we've been hearing in the last couple months under President Trump. And a lot of myths have been busted that Texas is racist. False. You see blacks saving whites and vice versa. Texas hates immigrants. They put out a story that people were checking IDs for illegals at homeless shelters. Also false. They were saying that, you know, Americans are always, you know, helpless and they're always victims. But 90% of these people are pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps. The left says that, you know, we spend too much money on the military. Well, a lot of these helicopters from the Coast Guard, very expensive. They're saving a lot of lives out there, and they're not run on solar power. They're run on diesel. They're saying President Trump can't run the government. I think the coordination's been spectacular. And if you're a Republican president, you're always going to get criticized. Bush was criticized for flying over Katrina. President Trump now criticized for landing in the aftermath. President Obama golfed during the BP oil spill. He golfed during the flooding in Louisiana last year, and the press praised him. So now Trump lacks empathy because he didn't go put his arm around and cry with a survivor. I'm not so sure that's what counts. It perfectly boils down what liberalism is. Liberals care about showing people that you care about their lives, where Republicans just want to save lives.
Kimberly, do you think that watching this stuff will change the minds of anybody who are already in a divisive kind of mindset? Like, you know, Antifa is going to watch this and go, gee, I am a loser. I walk around wearing a disguise all day and beat up people, and I see other people helping people. You know what? I'm taking this off, and I'm going to go find a job.
Yes, they're all going to disavow Antifa, and they're going to shed their disguises, their coward masks, and, you know, hug everybody. You know, Jesse, you bring up a point about the president, people criticizing him for not going to the victims. People actually understand the practicality and what happens when a president comes in like that, or a head of state into an area, especially of devastation that's already suffering. They have to shut down such a large perimeter. It really changes the game. It actually can prevent people from getting their lives saved, from getting shelter, from getting food and housing, all of the above. So you have to be smart about how you handle it so that you come in to do your job and see it up close and personal, but you are not an impediment in terms of being able for people to get the resources they need, and thereby even creating a further public safety problem, you know, and impacting it in a negative way. I think the president has handled this very well. Believe me, there would be 3,000 news stories about how bad it was if he had made a misstep. You know, the most that they could cling to this, they were, you know, complaining that, you know, the first lady had heels on during one portion of it. That's what they had to seize on. So I am encouraged, Greg, once again, by something like this, that terrible devastation that you see going on, that people actually come together and you see people carrying other people on their back, trying to carry them to safety. Like, that's this country when we are at our strongest, not when we are divided or people are trying to pull us apart because of partisan discord or ideology.
You know, Juan, you see after a lot of tragedies, you see candlelight vigils and hashtags on Twitter. A lot of that stuff is done to feel good, but what you're seeing here are people just doing good. And I think that's what, I guess, changes the way, it changes the way people view America as this horrible, oppressive place. How oppressive is this when you see people coming together?
Well, I think your premise is off. I've never viewed America as a horrible, oppressive place.
I'm not talking about you, Juan.
But I'm saying, I guess you're talking about the left is why you directed it to me. But I don't think that's true. I think that what strikes me in this whole conversation is I think we're all responding to the criticism of President Trump is for lacking empathy. I think it was Ari Fleischer who said on Fox earlier, you know, not one word about the victims, in specific the policeman who died. He thought that might be appropriate. He's a Republican. I mean, and you see people saying, it's up to you.
I'm joking,
I'll let you decide.
He said some other very nice things.
Instead, you see Trump standing on top of a car, you know, waving the Texas flag, saying, what a crowd, what a turnout, like it's about him. And it's not about him. It should be.
But do actions not matter?
Hang on, let me finish. It should be in the spirit that you're talking, Greg, which is we see people who are making sacrifices, great sacrifices, putting themselves at risk in order to help others. But instead, what the kind of reaction we're getting from President Trump is, you know what? I'm not doing what President Bush did in Hurricane Katrina. this is going to be the best ever. He's congratulating his cabinet. He's saying, you know what, this is different. We've got under control. This was the worst rainfall ever. And you think, wait a second, what about the folks that Greg's been talking about? Those folks out there in that boat that you can see right there. What about the people who are struggling in the convention center, the people who can't get through, who are hungry?
He has talked about
He's helping them by doing his job. And you know whose opinion, no offense to all of us, whose opinion actually matters in this? It's Governor Abbott of Texas, the guy who is tasked with rebuilding a state for days, months, years to come. And you know what he said about President Trump and his administration's actions? He gave FEMA an A+ from the president on down, an A+ in the job that they're doing and working with him and working with the state, saying, and also said that he gave the declaration that he asked for emergency money faster than he's ever seen any president in the past do. So that's what matters, is the fact that we have a president who is acting, who's taking decisive action, and who is helping Governor Abbott hand in hand to help the individuals in Texas who so desperately need help right now.
Well, I'm all for President Trump getting any credit that he deserves. I just think that when you have a situation where FEMA steps up, and I think right now about 30,000 people, Lisa, are being housed by FEMA, I think you see people reacting much better than we did during the time of Katrina. But is this a moment for finger pointing or blaming a past president? No.
You kind of just did that.
And yet what you see is President Trump saying, here's how I measure myself against.
But that's exactly what you're saying. You don't want to point the finger, but that's exactly what you're doing at this moment.
I'm not doing it. He's doing it.
I want to go to President Trump, but what you're referring to is a mannerism that a competitive person in business does.
Right.
Like, he wants to do a great job. He's going to do a great job. Let's listen to him.
To those affected by this storm, we are praying for you, and we are here with you every single step of the way. And I can speak, I know, for the people in this room, every step of the way. To those Americans who have lost loved ones, all of America is grieving with you, and our hearts are joined with yours forever.
Any complaints on that, Jesse?
You know what I would say to this? This is exactly how President Trump is going to be judged, on results. He is going to probably be, if things continue with GDP growth, with the stock market, and with job creation and wages, he will be judged on the economy. And people in 4 years are going to say, you know what? He's got some personal drama. He fires everybody. It's chaos. And he says some things that are offensive. He tweets all the time. But you know what? Stock market's up. My 401k is doing better. I have more take-home pay. I'm going to vote to reelect. It's the same exact thing with this hurricane. Okay, so he brags about how well the recovery is going to do. He doesn't do the window dressing like the left praises Obama for. You know what? He's going to send him the money. He's going to send him the resources. And the coordination up until this point has been spectacular.
That's right.
What really matters is the people that are suffering in Texas and had to go through this. They know the real truth and who's been there for them to provide and comfort their family in the time of need by providing resources. I think it speaks for itself.
You know, just one point before we go. I was watching Trace Gallagher report from a Black Hawk helicopter. He's actually reporting the news 1,000 feet in the air. I would throw up. I just realized that I'm not a reporter. This is as far as I'm going to go in life, is sitting here reading.
You almost
things.
threw up the time we made you go in the kayak. Remember, you turned white.
Sometimes I almost throw up on the 5.
So bad.
I'm a very weak person.
Yeah, Lisa, be careful.
Yes.
Seriously.
Do not talk about seafood. I will go just. Anyway, coming up, a big controversy over how Pastor Joel Osteen responded to Hurricane Harvey. That report is next.
I think this notion that somehow we would turn people away or we weren't here for the city is about as false as can be. I think this notion that somehow we would turn people away or we weren't here for the city is about as false as can be. I think sometimes, you know, somehow social media can be very powerful and they can create this false narrative. But if you're sitting in another state and you're not here, I mean, my niece was stranded right across the street from this building, nowhere to go. This building was 1 foot from flooding. If we didn't have our floodgates, it would have flooded. And so it's easy to say, wow, there's that big building, they're not using it.
Pastor Joel Osteen is facing harsh criticism for failing to immediately open up his church's 16,000-seat sanctuary to victims of Hurricane Harvey. Lakewood Church's arena in Houston is now open as a shelter, and Pastor Osteen is pushing back against all the flack he's been getting. So, Greg, when you first heard the story the other day that Joel denied people entry into his church as a shelter, what did you think immediately?
You know what? It's funny. The instinct is to join the mob because it feels good. When I mean the mob, I mean the new moral majority, which is Twitter and Facebook. Yeah. It's replacing the old school moral majority. If you screw up, they're on you. And it feels really, really good. And because it's an easy target. You know, people who never say a word about ISIS will say a word about a televangelist because, you know, they're extremely wealthy. They fundraise off the elderly. There's a lot of things that aren't good about it. And his argument, they didn't need us, it's not a great argument. But I have to say that he is correct that I think the whole story may not be out about this. And if you have a built-in cynicism about televangelism, that will shade the way you look at this. I grew up, as you did, Juan, with Swaggart and Baker and Robert Tilton and Benny Hinn, and you have this built-in skepticism. And so that kind of informs you. But he might be completely innocent. He might be absolutely right. And that's why you cannot judge the mob on Twitter. That's the new morality, and it's as inaccurate as every other kind.
Yeah, there's two sides to every story, but I think if Trump's not going to be the villain, Kimberly, the media needed a villain. And this guy, you know, rich, white, Christian televangelist,
worth
he
like
fits the
million,
bill.
Right. So, and a lot of Southerners aren't fond of the mega churches, et cetera. And, you know, the church and Lakewood has specifically provided him and his family, you know, a very opulent lifestyle. So the problem is that people actually went out and researched and said, wait a second, the church is pretty much unscathed. So what are you saying about the flooding, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah, maybe he was worried about the church getting trashed, but it is a place of worship. How would God and Jesus want it used and intending it for in a time like this? Well, to open the doors, to take in those that are your poor, that are your weak, that are your suffering, the children, the elderly, those that are, you know, infirm and unable to care for themselves. So, okay, perhaps, yes, he's doing the right thing now. Fantastic. But maybe he regrets, you know, but we all make mistakes.
What do you think, Juan?
Well, you know, I'm with Greg, although I was shocked to hear you speak so explicitly about how they fundraise off the elderly.
Well, that's what I had a mother who was very religious, and I just think of all of those people for those decades.
No, I think
you know what I mean?
Right, but I mean, you know, you hit it right at the heart of it. I mean, you know, you got to wonder. And then the problem, I think, for a lot of people like me, you know, I'm a church-going Christian, is that Joel Osteen, with his prosperity gospel, hardly ever talks about Jesus or the things that Kimberly was just talking about, which is, you know, if you're a good person, you're supposed to prosper. God wants the best for you. But then what if you are suffering? And what if, you know, the clouds open up on your head in Houston? That doesn't mean you're a bad person. And then, of course, you got this very prosperous church sitting there and this very rich man. And you say, you know, it's tough for a rich man to get into heaven. But why can't he open the doors to that church? It's sitting right there. Initially, they said, oh, well, the floodwaters are there. But then there was reporting on the ground that said, no, the floodwaters weren't here. So then you start to think, what's going on? And is he being honest and straightforward in saying this, or is he just trying to defend his reputation? I'll leave that to him. I don't want to pick on him in any way. You know, I just hope that what he's saying is true. But I will say this, that when you see someone stand aside in a moment of need, that is a damning condemnation for a Christian man.
And it was definitely a PR debacle. He probably wasn't thinking that was going to be something he had to deal with. And I don't know if he dealt with it appropriately. I guess maybe it was a little late. But like you always say, if you tweet something that's wrong, everybody sees it, and then you tweet an apology or correction, and no one sees it. This could be one of those situations.
You okay?
Well, look, I think...
No, I was just sitting.
He's projecting. Well, look, there is, of course, an expectation for churches, especially one of this amount of resources, to give back to their local community, particularly at a time like right now when so many people are in need. I mean, I will say that they've now taken in 300 people. Yep. They are using the church as a distribution center. Back in 2001, they gave refuge to 5,000 people. But look, you know, I think if all the people spent as much time talking about him and criticizing him on actually focusing on the victims, we'd be in a much better place. And I really think it's sad right now where people are using this storm to malign people that they disagree with. And I think that's what's happening with him. That's what's happening with Melania Trump and her stupid heels. What woman doesn't have different pairs of shoes? I wore sandals on the way over here and changed into heels. Or Morning Joe Reid, going after President Trump, saying he lacks empathy, using this storm to malign someone or even trying to drive some sort of climate change political narrative with it. Like, let's just focus on what matters, as Kimberly said earlier on the show, and that's the victims of the storm. So, you know what? He's doing the right thing now. I don't know what the truth is. I'm going to take his word for it. But let's focus on the people that need help. So
I think the problem, too, though, was Twitter is replacing actual action. So when people see a tweet that says pray for the people, but there's no action there, people can immediately sense hypocrisy. And I think that was the bad move. He should have been probably doing something else.
Yeah, but he's got to take responsibility.
Yes,
and so when people ask and say, I'm sorry, what did you say?
I think maybe.
Oh, so when people say, what was the response from the church? And the response from the church initially, apparently, was to tell people who were calling, call the city.
Right.
That sends a signal. So, Greg, even if social media is a mob, and I can tell you, I think it's a mob. But at some point, you have to take responsibility for your own actions.
Right.
And I think that he has not been clear and direct in saying, here's what we did and here's how I took responsibility.
The one thing I'll just remind the good pastor at this time, he gives one sermon in particular where he talks about not having a pity party for oneself. So good advice right now. He's taking a little bit on the chin, but open up your heart and the doors of your church.
There it is. All right. President Trump on the road today, touting his plan to put more money in your pockets. We'll analyze the situation directly ahead.
You can go your own way. You can call it.
President Trump traveled to Springfield, Missouri today to promote his plan to lower taxes for working Americans. For the inside story, let's go to Ed Henry at the White House. Ed?
Wait, that sounds like Greg booing me. I'm going to go forward anyway. Kimberly, good to see you at least. Look, this is President Trump taking on the swamp that he talked about in the campaign, the entrenched special interests, largely here in Washington, who like the fact that the tax code is very complicated, full of loopholes. It helps them over the middle class. This is the very reason why we have not had major bipartisan tax reform since 1986. So he went to the heartland, Missouri, to say he wants to set a goal of cutting the corporate tax rate as low as 15% from the current 35%, and brought back some of the populist rhetoric from the campaign, the president saying that he wants to see individual tax cuts go to the middle class, not to the rich, go to the workers. Yet on the left and the right, he almost immediately found opposition. Ann Coulter, Chuck Schumer, both saying this is going to help Wall Street, not Main Street. Coulter had a tweet storm telling the president he should focus instead on illegal immigration, save taxes for a second term, saying, quote, "Oh, stop pretending. This is about letting families keep more of their money. Half of Americans don't pay taxes. This is for Wall Street." Schumer saying much the same, quote, "If the president wants to use populism to sell his tax plan, he ought to consider actually putting his money where his mouth is and putting forward a plan that puts the middle class, not the top 1%, first." The president, as you can imagine, rejected all of that and said it's now time for Schumer, the Democratic leaders, as well as the Republican leaders, to step up to the plate, get this done, unlike health care.
I think Congress is going to make a comeback. I hope so. Tell you what, the United States is counting on it.
The president also taking some heat for being very light on the details. But White House officials are amused by that because they say, look, when health care failed, they got blamed for trying to jam specific legislation down Congress's throat. John McCain and others said, look, let Congress work its will, go through regular order, let the committees start working on it and build momentum for it instead of forcing them to do it. Now they're doing that on taxes, saying, OK, Congress, you take the lead. And they're getting criticism here at the White House that they're not laying out the details. Kimberly?
All right, Ed, thank you for that. Yay, Ed.
Boo.
Boo, Greg. Okay, go ahead, Greg. You can speak.
I'm for corporate tax relief, but I'm for tax relief for everybody, including even liberals, because, you know, liberals target Republicans. They target Republicans with taxes. How do they do it? They tax small businesses, they tax firearms, and they tax awesome rich people. So they target Republicans. We could do the same to liberals. We could tax yoga classes, gender studies majors, independent films starring James Franco. But we don't do that because we are better. So I had an idea. 1 year, everybody should agree to this. 1 year tax holiday, collect no income taxes for an entire year. It'll add maybe 3.5 trillion to the debt, but it's at 18 trillion already. What's 3.4 more? Seriously, why not?
And because it ultimately helps. And do you have some math on this?
No, we all have more money to spend. The government will just go. I mean, the economy will explode. Everybody will be happy. We'll be in debt because we're already in debt.
Throw it on the credit card.
Throw it on. So, Juan, what do you
Speaking
think?
engagements are just going to be flowing in.
What do you think of this idea?
Well,
Wow.
I don't know what to say, but I imagine that you'd want a second one. If you did it for 1 year, you'd want it for 2
That's
years
the
because what the
problem.
hell? But I mean, no, but I don't. I mean, come on. You got to have some sense of community. We do pay taxes, right?
Well, sales tax. It'd be a sales tax. You'd have a sales tax.
You have a sales.
Well,
Oh,
he's
you can
looking
have
at
some
some
tax.
different-
Yeah,
Nine,
yeah. I said
nine,
file.
Remember that?
I said file income tax.
Where's Herman Cain when we need him?
Yeah, but I saw something on this today from Fox News, Dana Blanton, the poll. It says 78%. 78% do not believe tax reform is going to happen this year. The second thing to say is that you
All
have...
those people were in the Senate.
All those people were in the Senate. The second thing to say is when they were asked, as you can see on the screen, about the importance, hey, look at this. 49% say yeah, 46% say no. What is going on here? But again, 78% not likely to happen. This is striking to me because you have a high percentage of Republicans, but overwhelming numbers of independents and Democrats.
But isn't that
who
more
don't
about
see it happening.
Congress, Juan? Because
No.
you know they haven't been putting through any legislative agenda for the president whatsoever. So I think this is more of a reflection about Congress not getting something done, to be quite frank.
Well, I think you're right to this extent. I think the president promised on health care and then says the Congress didn't deliver. We have lots of arguments there. But in this case, I think tax reform is so central to what he promised during the
think so, too.
campaign.
Well-
And tax cuts.
Well, that's for his and for midterm elections and for his success going forward. Should he seek re-election, Lisa?
Well, yeah, and to that point, it was Senator Mike Lee that said if we don't get tax reform done, we're dead. And that is absolutely the truth. They promised health care. They promised tax reform. They did not deliver on health care. They have to deliver on tax reform. It's going to be complicated. Obviously, the reason why this hasn't happened in over 30 years is because it's incredibly complex. But I actually think that Republicans are better off with tax reform than health care because health care was very complicated to try to message to the American people because you're not really actually substantially reforming health care through the reconciliation process. I think there's more they can do with health care. It was smart to go to Missouri, a state that he won. I think it was by 19 points, putting pressure on a red state Democrat. I'd like to see more of that and going around to all the 10 states that he won where Democrats are seeking tough re-elections.
I think that's what he's got to do. Go grassroots. Go grass state.
That's right. I'm very disappointed in the president's tax proposal. When I interviewed him, he said it was going to be a historic tax cut and it was going to be Reagan-esque. And now I'm reading they're only dropping the tax top bracket from 39 to 36. That's nothing. And now I'm hearing like they might not even drop it at all. They might leave the top rate at 39. That's not a massive amount of tax relief. That's nothing. And that's not going to stimulate growth either. This is our money.
Stop.
We made the money. This is our money that we earned. It's not the government's money.
You're making me crazy.
Why should we give the government
Jesse,
more
what are you
money?
doing?
When
Jesse,
it's
That
gonna
didn't
waste
just
it
start
on working
tonight.
corruption.
Jesse. Wait a minute.
I know,
Trump
and
is
ongoing.
great. Go, Trump, go. Trump is doing right. I'm Jesse Waters. Trump is just terrific, and I can't believe that this guy, this lefty, this commie, is sitting here anti-capitalist.
Anti-capitalist? No, I want more tax relief, Juan. We have federal receipts are at its highest level of all time. I think we can afford to keep more of our own money. The government just wasted on pork and corruption.
All you're doing
Second
is
of all,
attacking Trump.
said he was going to bring down the top rate on corporate taxes from 35 to 15. Now I'm hearing just 25.
Did you just
What's that?
Did you just break up with POTUS?
That's what I'm saying.
You know what?
Son of a
We're on a break.
We're on a timeout.
It's complicated officially on
Exactly.
Facebook.
All right. We're going to console Jesse. Waters World. We'll ride again.
Like Ross and Friends. It's a break.
We're on a break.
We're on a
He's
break.
exactly like Ross and Friends. Okay.
Waters.
Yeah. Even Nancy Pelosi has had it with one far left-wing group. We're going to have that story next. Stay with us.
Over the weekend, members of the far-left group Antifa, anti-fascists, physically assaulted conservatives, Trump supporters, at a demonstration in Berkeley, California. The actions of the masked anti-fascist people were so outrageous that even Nancy Pelosi the minority leader of the House, is denouncing the group, releasing a statement that said, quote, "The violent actions of people calling themselves Antifa in Berkeley this weekend deserve unequivocal condemnation, and the perpetrator should be arrested and prosecuted," unquote. Now, I think for a lot of people at this table, they say, oh, we always beat up on Nancy Pelosi. She's never right. She's the liberal left. But I think you guys are going to agree. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm happy. I think this is great, but we can all agree on that. So be sensible, admit the obvious, because they're against people on the left. They're against people on the right. They're a dangerous, violent group that should not be condoned or tolerated by anyone. So, yeah, this is great. She's like abandoning any sense of hypocrisy in this statement that she's released. And so I'm happy for her.
You know what's interesting to me is I think Democrats have been slow to do what Nancy Pelosi just did. Normally, you'd say Nancy Pelosi is going to follow the Democratic consensus, but here she seems to be setting something apart, Jesse. What's going on?
Well, yeah, I mean, I hope some of her colleagues take heed of what she did and follow along. But you want to know why they don't a lot of the times condemn this type of left-wing violence? It's because reporters never ask them to. Let's just give you an example. If there is a Tea Party guy and he gets into a fender bender, every reporter on Capitol Hill would go to every single elected Republican official and say, what do you think about this right-wing road rage? And then they'd have to answer for it. Then that would become a story. But what happens is these left-wing reporters cover for the Democrats so they don't have to condemn their own. Plus, you want to know why the Democratic leadership hasn't said anything about this? Because there are no Democratic leaders. Besides Nancy Pelosi, who is it? Schumer? His name ID is in the teens. Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC, 9 out of 10 Democrats on the street don't even know who he is. That's why they're not condemning it, because there's no leadership.
Well, actually, Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, was asked after the events in Charlottesville.
Because it was in his state.
Yeah, and he was reluctant to condemn. So, Lisa, let me just come to you. Could it be that Democrats think, oh, people are going to equate Antifa with the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis when, in fact, they don't believe that, the Antifa is moving towards the mainstream and influencing American politics in the way at the moment we see from the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis?
Look, one thing I'd like to point out, as I said on America's Newsroom, on Monday, where is Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, that represents Berkeley? And where is Nancy Pelosi? And a day later, she puts out a statement. So it's just good to know that she listens to me. She takes my advice. I'll have more advice later throughout the night. But no, it also exposes a couple things. It exposes the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party, who sat here over the past couple of weeks and said, we denounce hate, we denounce violence in this country, but silence. The only person we've heard from, as we've noted, is Nancy Pelosi. Terry McAuliffe couldn't even bring himself to say, no, Antifa is bad. And you know what else it exposes the bias in the media, because Jesse is absolutely right. Where is the media going to Democrats and asking for statements, putting them on record? Do you support Antifa or not? And so, yeah, it absolutely exposes their bias, because the media was more than happy to use a hate group, which every Republican under the sun denounced, to try to malign the Republican Party and the President of the United States. So shame on Democrats and shame on the media outside of us.
There's also, to be fair, there's also Republicans and people currently in Congress that have not denounced it either, and they should. But, they didn't want to be tied in because they're upset about Trump's comments, and so now they don't want to say anything about it. That's the real deal.
So, Greg, it was an interesting piece in the Washington Post op-ed. Mark Thiessen was writing about how the fact that you have one group that's associated with the Nazis, but you have another group that's associated with the communists, and that both historically have killed masses of people, arguably more so by the communists.
It's a great point. And I mean, this statement that Pelosi made is a complete no-brainer, which is why she was good at it. But I am going to say, I have to congratulate. No, I do have to congratulate her. I'm glad she said it, because we should condemn all violence on both sides.
Yes.
Wait, who said that first and got yelled at? Let's not go there, but we know who said it, and he was right. All right, let's also be clear. This is not a protest group, okay? It's a violent group of clowny cowards. And why? A protest group does not hide behind a mask. You know what group hides behind a mask? The KKK. The Antifa is the new KKK. Those are the only two groups I can think of that wear masks besides kids on Halloween. But this is it. They are the new KK. They go after, they attack people, and they know they're doing wrong, which is why they wear the mask. If they were doing something right, they wouldn't wear the mask, like the KKK. They are the Antifa KKK. Let's call them that from now on.
Gutfeld's on fire, everybody.
Yes, yes. Liberal Senator Dianne Feinstein is saying she hopes Donald Trump will be a good president. Wow. We'll tell you what that's all about when the 5 returns.
I don't know your nights like this.
Senator Dianne Feinstein, a liberal stalwart, was speaking to a friendly audience in her hometown of San Francisco yesterday when she had some surprisingly positive things to say about President Trump.
Look, this man is going to be president, most likely for the rest of this term. I just hope he has the ability to learn and to change. And if he does, he can be a good president. And that's my hope.
Senator Feinstein later released a statement clarifying her remarks and criticizing President Trump for his response to the white nationalist violence in Charlottesville. Oh. Juan, are we so divided as a country that when she says something positive, she feels the need the next day to then send something negative out about the president?
Yeah, you know, at least this is an interesting point because I don't think she said anything negative, positive. I think she just said what we all as Americans
comparatively
hope.
speaking to what we've seen Democrats say, sadly, this is positive.
She was criticized, right?
Right. So it wasn't an all-out condemnation. I think that's what the left wants. The left just is in fury with Trump right now, and so all kinds of things get said and done. But I just think that what she said was almost pedestrian, saying, yeah, I hope that he can learn. I hope that he becomes a better man and a better president. I don't see, but I must say that the notion, the things that she touched on, Charlottesville, the pardon of Arpaio, what I'm seeing, for example, is a Fox poll out, it says 56% say Trump is tearing the country apart. So when you get the senator, the much respected senator, former mayor of San Francisco, very liberal town, saying, you know, I hope he can do well. I hope he can be a good president. I think there are lots of people who overreact, and I think that's what happened here.
We had the boos and the hisses. Greg, what do you think?
It was interesting. Scott Adams.
Technically, you did boo it.
Yeah. Scott Adams talks about the fact that there are 2 movies going on in the United States when it comes to Trump. One side sees Hitler. The other side sees a decent guy who might actually be a good president. She stepped out of her movie, and that's why she was in that other movie, and she stepped out and burst that shared delusion. She was supposed to say he's evil. She's supposed to say he's impeached. But instead, she spoke like a rational human being. She stepped out of that movie.
Right.
That's why everybody freaked out.
Kimberly, what do you think?
You know, I've known her for many, many years. She was my, hometown mayor and senator, and, I like her very much personally. She's very hardworking. She's highly intelligent. She's well respected amongst her peers. I thought what she said at the Commonwealth Club was good. It was the mature, reasonable, rational thing to say. We all wish for the president to do well. What I didn't like is that when she went ahead then and criticized and issued this sort of like mea culpa because people criticized her. I mean, she didn't do anything wrong when she said that at the Commonwealth Club. So, and she's like stronger and smarter than that. I wouldn't have caved to that and cowered to them.
Well, and Jesse, before she said at least something somewhat positive about the president, which is what we never hear from the Democratic Party, she was talking about how President Trump's going to need Republicans on tax reform. You also have someone like Claire McCaskill of Missouri, where President Trump just was, who said that she may be inclined to work with President Trump on lowering the corporate tax rate. I mean, do you think there's any semblance of Democrats realizing, 0 and 4 special elections, worst fundraising we've seen in forever, in a very long time for the Democratic Party? Is there any semblance where Democrats might work with Republicans on any of this stuff, tax reform or anything else?
You'd like to hope so. If Trump, you can get along with any Republican, it's probably Trump. He's transactional. He's a deal maker. He's not a doctrinaire ideologue.
He's a centrist, basically.
He's an independent. He's a populist. He could probably cut deals with Democrats on infrastructure, health care, and tax reform. But if Claire goes to the dark side, she's going to get primaried, and that's what they're all worried about. They're all worried about re-election. Juan misread the poll, I believe, about people saying that Trump is tearing the country apart. I think the poll said I think everyone says he's tearing it up. Like in a good way. He's tearing it up. Guy's tearing it up.
Wait, what? Is that what they meant? Is he tearing it up?
This is so important.
Tearing it up.
Tearing it up.
Tearing it up. Like in a good way. Like he's tearing it up.
Excuse me. I'm the old man at the table. Tearing it up. That's the way old people talk about dancing.
So what you just saw was Jesse got back together with POTUS.
All right.
Thank you.
On that